Hi, it's Wednesday. That means it's time for another video edition of Widower Wednesday. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and today we're going to discuss widowers and long distance relationships. I've had a couple coaching sessions and emails recently about this and realized I haven't really done a video, so we're going to discuss this topic, especially since my first serious relationship after being widowed was a long distance one. So I've got some really good personal experience here too. So that's what we're going to discuss. And even if you're not in a long distance relationship with a widower, I encourage you to watch it because there's a lot of behaviors I'm going to talk about with widowers and kind of red flags and warning signs that you can find useful, that you can maybe tell if the widower is really into you or not. Let's talk about how these typical situations go that I discuss, whether in coaching sessions or emails or however people prefer to contact me. It typically goes like this. The long distance relationship goes good for a long period of time, whatever, 6 months, a year, sometimes even longer. There's a kind of a schedule worked out where they're seeing each other on a regular basis every couple of weeks, maybe even once a month. Also, there's usually a general communication pattern, right? People are, they're talking on the phone, Skyping, texting, whatever their preferred method of communication is. There's some regular communication there. And usually, by the way, when the widower and this girlfriend are together, things are usually great, right? Things are, there's lots of time spent together. Things are really happy, and things are just going good. And then typically, what happens is there's a conversation or something happens where the woman starts talking about getting more serious. And what does that mean? Does it mean we need to, or maybe there's a chance for one person or the other to move closer together, right? There's a job change, or maybe there's some flexibility there at work. Maybe a person's getting near retirement. There's lots of options in there, and suddenly, it says, hey, we should be more serious about this. Whatever, I can move in, or I can move closer. And they have that conversation. Things seem to be going good, and generally after this conversation, the widower will typically, end things. And it's generally unexpected, right? The woman thinks things are going great, and then suddenly there's, a phone call, an email, a Skype session. Somehow the widower lets the woman know that, hey, I've been thinking about things aren't really working. I think we need to end the relationship. And it kind of comes as a big surprise and a big blow to these women who have just, in some cases, just spent just a few days ago were with a widower and things were great and things were wonderful, and suddenly, boom, out of nowhere, they've come crashing down. So the biggest challenge before I get into what's going on here with the widower, the biggest challenge in any long distance relationship is spending personal time together. And I'm not talking just phone calls or face-to-face things or video chats or however it is you're communicating. The biggest challenge in a long-distance relationship is actually spending one-on-one time together. And it's that one-on-one time where you really get to know a person, right? Where you can really kind of read body language, spend time with them, because being on a phone call or doing a video conference is one thing, but it's very different to actually be there in person and, see how the person reacts to different situations, watch how the person, interacts with people, read body language, things like that. And that's the biggest challenge in any long distance relationship. It's the biggest challenge I had too, right, is when I was in a long distance relationship, we had like an hour phone call every night, or, but there was still no personal one-on-one time other than the occasional trip we had to go see each other. So really, what's going on here with the widower is all widowers. I've done videos on this. All widowers at some point, they need to decide if they're ready to put aside the past and start a new chapter in their life. I mean, all widowers have to make that. It's just something that every widower has to do. They reach a point in the relationship where they really want to evaluate the relationship and say, is this woman I'm dating, is she worth, essentially, starting a new chapter with? And in typical cases, most widowers do this in about somewhere, in the first probably month or two of the relationship. The difference is in a long distance relationship, it takes longer for them to do that. So typically what you'll see is that in a non-long distance relationship, you're spending lots of time together, several times a week usually together. Things are maybe going good, maybe not going good or whatever, and the widower, again, it's usually within 4 to maybe 10 weeks of the relationship, kind of makes that decision: are things working or are they not working? In a long distance relationships, that takes a lot longer because the widower, again, you're not spending that one-on-one time together. So typically what's happening is you're spending a weekend together, which might be, I don't know, whatever, 2 or 3 days together. And, it's easy to have 2 or 3 days of fun with someone, and then, that person's gone for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. There's phone calls, and those phone calls aren't the same as being in person. And so the widower kind of he doesn't have that chance to really make that decision. It takes a lot longer to make that decision. I know, I've talked to people who have been in a relationship with a widower for, like a year, and every time they were together, it was great. And then, suddenly out of the blue, he calls it off. So it just takes them longer to decide, or maybe to have that conversation with themselves. Is the woman worth it? And again, generally that conversation happens when something happens in the relationship that means they can start spending more time together. So again, it can be maybe the widower says, hey, whatever, I've got a more flexible job schedule, or the woman says, hey, I can work remotely, or there's an opening in the area closer to where you are. I'm thinking about taking it and moving. Or hey, I'm retiring. Again, depending on the person's age there, and maybe we can spend some more time together. And then that kind of triggers that conversation, because it's really easy for guys and for widowers to kind of have to kind of go into a relationship where it's just where it's really a part-time relationship, right? It's the daily phone call, it's the occasional text. It's whatever, every 3 or 4 weeks flying one way or the other to go see each other and spend time. It's a part-time relationship. It doesn't take all that full-time commitment that a relationship takes when you're closer together. And so they don't really have to really emotionally invest in it. There's not a lot of sacrifices that the widower has to make. But then as soon as the rubber meets the road, and there's a real chance that this relationship has to be a full-time relationship instead of a part-time relationship, where you can actually maybe spend days together, then the widowers have that conversation with themselves. It's like, oh my gosh, is this person worth it? And that's when that's when the email or the phone call comes that says, I don't know if I can do this. I don't think this is worth it. And sadly, that's pretty typical. But what the long distance relationship done has just stretched out the inevitable. The truth is if you were to have an in-person relationship where you saw each other every day, the widower would have had this realization a lot sooner. And so just the distance and time, and not spending a lot of personal time with each other, and again, widowers kind of viewing it as a part-time relationship. That's really the reason they're not able. That's really the reason that it's taken a year, for example, for them to have this conversation instead of whatever the typical 2-month time span. So in my case, you can read about this in Room for Two if you want. In more detail, but in my case, I had a long distance relationship. I lived in the Salt Lake City area. This woman that I became serious with, she lived in Phoenix. So at the time, we had more or less daily phone calls with each other. We'd send emails to each other, and I think about once a month, either I'd fly down to Phoenix, or she'd fly up to Salt Lake, and we'd spend time together. And so the relationship went on for several months, and eventually I ended the relationship, mostly because, I started dating Juliana. But in hindsight, I don't think that relationship would have gone on as long as it had. For example, I lived in Phoenix, or she lived up here in the Salt Lake area, and we had actually spent time together. Again, I kind of viewed it as a part-time relationship. And for a widower, a part-time relationship is really kind of cool, because you get some emotional support, right? You get someone to talk to, someone to occasionally spend time with. And so they're meeting some emotional needs that widowers have when they've lost their wife. But they're just, again, it's not a full-time relationship, so they can kind of get some emotional needs met without really having to invest in it. And then I think when the rubber meets the road, they don't want to invest in it. And, say Juliana hadn't come along and I was in this long-distance relationship, truth be told, I don't think the relationship would have lasted that much longer anyway. I might have dragged on for another 3 or 4 months, but eventually it would have come to an end. There's no way the relationship just would have worked. And it probably would have come to an end once we started having a conversation about, I don't know, me moving to Phoenix or her moving to Salt Lake or something like that. We were both, again, we didn't have any kids. We were both kind of early in our careers, and that kind of flexibility would have been easy. But at some point, the relationship would have ended for better or worse. It was just a time thing. Just the fact that I met Juliana just speeded up the demise of it. I don't mean to, necessarily discourage long distance relationships or make you feel like if you're in a long distance relationship, it's doomed. Because I have seen them work out. I'd say they work out less often than they have a tendency to not work out. Let's just put it that way, more often than not. But some of them have worked out. So let me. I'm going to give you a couple of things here to maybe think about, so you can kind of see, what are, to kind of see if your long distance relationship has a chance here. And so I think the first thing you've got to do is you've got to decide, what do you want from this relationship long term. Obviously, moving closer together, yes, but I mean, are you looking at marriage? Are you looking at engaged? Are you looking at living together? Whatever your thing is, and does the widower want that same thing? And I think the best and fastest way to have this conversation, or the best and fastest way to know whether this long distance relationship is going to work out, is to really have that conversation and really push it, and do it in a face-to-face setting. Don't have this conversation, over a video chat or something where it's like, hey, I really think, whatever, we should find some way to move closer together or make things work out, because you're not going to really see all the body language and stuff. It's really a conversation you need to have face-to-face. And then find out if the widower wants the same thing. Because if he feels that it's really serious, you'll find out pretty quick how serious he is about the relationship. If he just wants a casual part-time relationship that doesn't really require the real commitment of I'll say a full-time relationship, but you really need to be on the same page. And again, I think if the widower is serious about the relationship, he'll be discussing ways as well. This isn't just a conversation that you'll just bring up, but I think he'll be discussing ways as well. How can we make this work? Is there a way that, we can see each other more often, or do things like this, instead of just kind of, hey, this part-time thing is kind of cool, and, we'll figure it out eventually. I think widowers will they'll find a way to make it work. And then I would also say, after you have that conversation, are there feasible plans to whatever, move closer together, move in with each other, do something like that. I will put one thing of warning on it. I would not move in with a widower, or give up your life and move closer, unless you're engaged or really have some kind of commitment. I've seen lots of women get burned where, again, they quit their job and start maybe another job so they can move in closer to the widower, and it doesn't even have to be moving in with them. But I have talked to lots of women where it's been like, they have a great job, and whatever, they quit their job, move several hundred miles away for maybe an okay job or a lesser job, and as soon as that happens, the widower dumps them. Don't be the one making all the sacrifices here. If the widower is serious about a relationship and about a relationship with you, he'll find a way to make some sacrifices too. Too often, I think it falls straight on the woman to whatever, sell her things or move in or do something, and the widower is just kind of sitting there. Widowers who are serious about this will find a way to make it work, and they'll be willing to sacrifice things in a long distance relationship. So I guess, make sure there's feasible plans and you actually have some kind of commitment. I think it's one thing to move closer to somebody, maybe when you have a wedding date, and it's one thing to do it when you are just moving to be closer with somebody because the widower says so. Don't be burned. Don't get burned. Be wise, and do everything you can to make sure the widower is serious about this. And the final tip, I guess, is to find ways to spend as much time together as possible. And then, like, when you are together, get off your phones, put the phones away, spend some actual time together. And don't overlook red flags. I think it's easy to kind of rationalize in a long distance relationship that he's just acting this way because we don't see each other a lot. I think it's part of being in a long distance relationship. For example, if you want to, a good way is, you're there for the weekend. Does he have plans to introduce you to friends and family? Does he usually hang out with people? Are you part of that circle, or are you guys just hanging out together for the weekend, and you go back and you guys have been doing this for months and you've never met anyone? I think it's a good I personally think, it's maybe a good sign if the widower is actually introducing you to people. If you go and see him and stuff, whereas, you go and see him and you're just spending time together. And I know it's a long distance relationship. You want to spend time together. But I think, are you being included in his circle, for example, or is he hiding you? Is he going through some of the other and normal red flags? So anyway, long distance relationships, they can work, but I think, you've just got to be wary of them and understand that a widower needs to have that personal conversation with himself. That is the relationship worth it? And he's not going to have that conversation until he really feels the relationship is going to be serious. So figure out a way to spend time together. Figure out a way. Watch his behavior when you're together, see if he's including you, and doing the normal things that you would typically expect any man to do, especially if you were in a closer relationship. Hope this helps. Leave any comments or questions about long-distance relationships below. Feel free to subscribe and check out more Widower Wednesday videos. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and I'll see you next Wednesday.